this past Shabbat, which was, I believe, November 5th, this past Shabbat, which was the Sabbath in which we read the Torah portion of Lech Lecha. So before our podcast last week, I neglected to mention that it was the Yartzeit, the Yom HaShanah, the anniversary of the pastoring of our matriarch Rachel. And in Israel, the 11th day of the month of Mar Cheshvan, the passing of Rachel is a very big deal. We're in thousands and thousands of people go and pray at her tomb, which is just at the very beginning of Bethlehem, as we read in the Torah, when she died along the way, giving birth to Benjamin, and Yaakov buried her before he was able to get to Hebron, which of course is where the tomb of the patriarchs is. And the significance of Rachel being buried there in Bethlehem is staggering for many reasons in Torah literature. The thing is, though, that it's just a whole powerful idea. That day here in Israel, she is associated with powerful prayer before Hashem, and I want to talk about that. And also, personally, one of the strongest spiritual experiences that I ever had many, many years ago when I was quite young was there at the tomb of Rachel. It's a very, very moving place. And the interesting thing is that, so the 11th of Mar Cheshvan, the day of her passing this year, was this past Shabbat, November 5th, which was the day in which we read the Torah portion of Lech Lecha, beginning in Genesis chapter 12. And actually, that was like an intersect, like that Torah portion being read the very same day of her passing, although she doesn't figure in that Torah portion. She hasn't appeared yet on the scene. But yet, actually, in fact, every year, the 11th of Mar Cheshvan usually falls out somewhere in the juxtaposition with Shabbat Lech Lecha, but this year was the same day. What's the point? There is a very strong commonality between Avraham Avinu and Rachel. They share something in common, two things that I'm thinking of really. Very, very powerful kind of shared lesson that we get from both Rachel and Avraham. What did Rachel, the matriarch, have in common with Avraham? What would you hazard as a guess?
Right off the top of my head, I would say that apparently, since Rachel was so incredibly beautiful, Avraham must have been quite handsome. I digress. No, would it be their kindness? Would it be their hesed?
So that is actually, you have already skipped the first stage that I wanted to talk about it because you're so smart and you're so handsome, etc., etc. That you actually that is something very powerful. Let me get to that in a moment. That's actually the main thing I wanted to say. But before that, I think there is something very basic. Like the first thing that comes to my mind is that both of them have a similar background. Their parents, their fathers were idolaters.
Yes, very good.
So now what is really compelling? That they could have stayed where they were. They could have stayed put. They could have stayed with what they were born into. They could have been complacent. Nobody would have found them guilty of anything, of any slothful behavior had they just remained who they were born to be, and they certainly were expected. And that way they could certainly have been politically correct. They could have avoided a tremendous amount of friction with their families. But each one of them, in their own way, Abraham and Rachel, were responsible for blazing a whole new trail and changing the world and building the nation of Israel for the sake of the world. And so from both of them, I think we learned that, and they both stepped incredibly outside their comfort zone. And I think that, if you really want to take a step for Hashem, you have to exhibit this faith and courage and go out on your own. And it's not a simple thing. Not everybody can do that, to take that kind of a step. But that's one thing that I think we learned from both of them, that it's like they heard Hashem calling them, like an inner voice, both of them. Because if we're just complacent, then we're not gonna get anywhere. Look at Abraham. The very first thing in the parsha last week in Lech Lecha is Hashem is telling him to move, to get out, to go. Lech Lecha, go for yourself or go into yourself. A journey of self-knowledge. Discover who you can be, who you really are. So you have to advance all the time. You can never become complacent, and that's the story of our lives. Like Hashem is beckoning to us all the time to go against the stream. Not to settle for any sort of compromise on what we believe and what we know to be true. So that's the first thing. But the second thing, which I think is a much deeper connection, is exactly what you said, and that is they share a certain propensity for this all-powerful quality of chesed, of kindness, which is the most important quality that a person can have. And a lot of people think they probably have heard this before and understand it, but it's really much, much deeper than we can just, summarize just by saying, oh, yes, he was a man of kindness, and yes, she was Here's the thing, because I started to mention Rachel. Mm-hmm. And I mentioned the commonality between Avraham and Rachel, which is a powerful lesson for us that has a very strong message for us now. That's what I'd like to get to. But in addition to the fact that they had this similar idolatrous background, and that they chose to overcome it, they chose to go out on their own, and they chose something else, and they chose not to remain and to use the excuse of being just, this is how I was born and I'm going to go through the motions. They chose to listen to the inner voice instead. There's something else, and that is the side of chesed, as you pointed out immediately when I asked you the question. So we know about Avraham. We see from the beginning of this parsha this almost unspeakable devotion to kindness to others at his own personal expense, and how it literally, metaphorically, but literally, Torah is teaching us that it literally led him into Gan Eden, his desire to do chesed. Rachel is the same way, and it's unsung. It's unsung, and it's a very, very remarkable idea. So from both Avraham and Rachel, we see that chesed, kindness, is absolutely the foundation of the world. It's not just like another aspect of a fine person, like to be good to other people. It's everything. It's really everything. Let's wish our viewers and listeners a beautiful week. Let's all take the chesed challenge to look for opportunities for acts of kindness, and always be willing to take that same stand that Rachel took and Avraham, to step away from the tide of conformity, especially when it is against the will of Hashem, and to take a stand in this world for the one true God. Shalom, shalom.
Amen.